Thank you very much, Eric, and panel. It is indeed a pleasure to be sitting on a panel with such esteemed company, and I certainly don't feel justified, so I'll try and do my best. I spoke with Chris a little while ago since leaving DFAT about my interest in Indonesia and more broadly in Australian business engagement in Indonesia. And it's something I must say that I've been persuaded to be interested in since leaving DFAT. What I mean by that is Indonesia, as like many people, as I suggested earlier today, outside of this room, doesn't fall immediately direct and front and centre of their business radar. So when I saw the opportunity and the challenge in taking up this role with the AIBC, that was the key thing I wanted to address. How do we move Indonesia for Australian business front and centre of thinking? And I've talked about Chinese de-addiction and Chinese diversification. It is a real phenomenon, and this is the time to strike in terms of putting Indonesia, again, front and centre on the Australian business radar. I guess what I see as the opportunity specifically in the IACPA and why this is such an exciting time for the AIBC, this is a real operational, a real practical time for the AIBC and its role, is I've asked myself, what does a deeper economic integration actually mean, and therefore what are the opportunities? What does the IACPA offer us as a business community beyond what ANZFTA already does or will offer upon ratification? And the answer for me is quite simple. Deeper economic integration means bringing together opportunities and challenges. And without those two inputs, there's no point in pursuing deeper economic integration. So the opportunities are, when we look at Indonesia as Australian business and when we look at Australia as Indonesian business, what are the key complementarities that can be exploited for mutual benefit? And when we look at the challenges, what are the current impediments to that free flow, not just in terms of market access, but that free flow of goods, ideas and people and other things? That's why I see Indonesia as the perfect storm, the perfect case for addressing through a high quality, a very ambitious but realistic trade agreement, if you will. So that's what I bring to the role in terms of the AIBC, and that's why this event has been so energising for me, to see luminaries of the Australia-Indonesia business landscape for the past 20, 30 years sitting on stage and explaining why there are so many opportunities, and again, particularly in the breakout sessions, why there are so many challenges and what can we do to address those. So, with that framework in mind, opportunities and challenges, the breakout sessions did indeed provide a lot of detailed information, all of which I'm not going to present here today. I just thought I'd draw out some common themes of interest. The first issue, which I think has been common to most of the groups, has been education, and the role of education in terms of, again, the complementarities of economies. Now, what I mean by that is, and I think in the words of Leonie Lethbridge from ANZ, who chaired the Services subcommittee, is bringing together, or essentially creating a division of labour between what Australia does well and what Indonesia does well. Now, my immediate question, well, what does Indonesia do well in the education space? And the immediate answer, almost by consensus, was technology, and particularly technology deployment. There are genuinely opportunities around Australian service delivery expertise and Indonesian technology deployment opportunities which need to be exploited. Now, this is getting quite detailed, but this is to give a flavour of the kinds of issues which we need to have on the radar. Again, in the education services sector, there was a genuine enthusiasm and passion that this agreement uniquely can bring about some key changes in order to exploit the demand side, in particular on the Indonesian side, and the supply side on the Australian side. And ways that we can bring those two factors together, the demand and the supply, to take on the rest of the world. And that's a theme which I think really needs some serious attention by the negotiators and by business. Now, I'll give you some examples of the ideas we've been throwing around, both within the AIBC and more broadly here today. Why can't Australian businesses partner with Indonesian businesses for the mutual benefit and to take on third-party markets? That's got to do with market access, but also bringing the complementarity of our economies and businesses together to tackle opportunities out there in third countries. There are many examples I could go through, but one from the retail fashion trade, for example. If you will, go with me on a journey for an Australian company that designs T-shirts or fashion, has them printed and manufactured in Indonesia and then exported to the world. That's a model that to an extent exists, but why can't we build on that including through addressing it perhaps with a framework in the IACPA to formalise that understanding. So zooming back out to the broader level, I want you to keep in mind the opportunities around Australian and Indonesian businesses partnering together to take on third parties. Now that is a common theme across what I've heard from today. The other area is capacity building. Now, capacity building can sound benevolent, and it should be benevolent, but it's also out of self-interest. Capacity building means, in many cases, working with government and regulators to make sure that you create and establish a level playing field, for example, for Australian mining services companies. So again, it can sound benevolent, and it should be, but the question is, what can an IACPA add or bring to the table? And I think the answer to Economic Cooperation Package is an excellent start. For those familiar with that, it establishes a fund essentially for assisting Indonesia, in the case of Indonesia, with implementing the outcomes in the trade agreement, a real practical use of essentially aid budgets. I think if we zoom out and look at the opportunity for the IACPA to provide a value add here, I would say capacity building on a sector by sector basis. So let's take the example of mining services, for example, or perhaps infrastructure. Given the perceived non-level playing field for some Australian companies in that sector, there's an opportunity for governments to engage with other governments to establish frameworks for businesses to sit down with other businesses to work out ways in which they can better partner with each other to navigate those complexities. Now, that sounds quite general, but anyone in the mining services field will know exactly what I'm talking about. Market access, surprisingly, didn't feature very highly outside of the agricultural sector. Maybe that's not surprising in terms of the extent to which the ANZFTA has pushed the barrier. So a job well done to the ANZFTA negotiators. There are still some issues that effectively address market access concerns, but they are more behind the border barriers, particularly meat and livestock and other such trade. And those detailed notes will be flowing through, of course, to the AIBC submission. Another issue of potential cooperation for capacity building is in the area of central versus regional government regulation. A lot of people talked in the various sectors around how do you, even if you achieve agreement to a certain project, for example, how do you navigate the differences that you're hearing from one government as opposed to, say, a regional government locally? And that's particularly so in the mining and infrastructure game, and less so in financial services, which are effectively centrally regulated. This is another area that I'm hearing a very strong interest from businesses to engage with businesses and regulators, perhaps through a government framework, which is again where the IACPA can creatively come in. Another area in terms of education and capacity building is the establishment of a framework for mutual recognition. So this is not necessarily a harmonisation of standards or qualifications, but it's building a solid framework, government to government, that allows organisations that recognise and certify domestically to really engage with each other, with the imprimatur of government, for mutual benefit in terms of flow of ideas, people and trade and investment. So I've just teased out from very specific areas and some more general areas for discussion. All of these will be appearing in quite considerable detail in the AIBC submission to government. But I would urge you, and I guess you can see my passion for these negotiations quite evident today, I would urge you individually as businesses, as industry associations, not just to consider your own submissions, not just to feed information, intelligence and ideas through the AIBC, but to sit down and consider the platform that the IACPA presents, the very real platform for engagement through government to achieve good outcomes. And I think if we all pause for thought and think, what can I as an individual, my self-interest in this negotiation, what can I contribute? Again, collectively, that intelligence will inform certainly the Australian government's position, and I think there's a genuine thirst for information and knowledge and that practical trade intelligence, which hopefully will flow through to some practical outcomes. So with that, I'll leave it to the expert panel to discuss broader issues, and I would be pleased to hear from anyone who has practical, creative, unique ideas as to how to energise these negotiations from a business perspective. Thank you very much.